Welcome back to the Centered on Buffalo podcast. This week we are joined by Chris Trapasso. He is an NFL draft expert and analyst for CBS Sports, and so he is completely dialed in on the draft. He's also from Western New York, so he's dialed in on the Bills too. We're going to have a fun conversation about who the Bills may be targeting in the draft, players of need for the Bills. We'll take a general look at the draft, and also maybe if we're going to see some Brandon Beane moves on draft night as well this year, like we've seen so many times in the past. Thank you for everyone who's subscribed to the podcast. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe so you get pushed out the episodes weekly. And then also, please leave a review, leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Go Bills. Enjoy the podcast.
Hit us up on all social media at The Buffalo Pod.
Chris, welcome back on the podcast, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me, Eric. This is always an honor to jump on here and talk NFL draft. Just like always really close to the draft too, so there's a lot of excitement in the air for sure.
Yeah, and we always record this close to the draft, your busiest time of the year, so we thank you again for taking the time to make this happen. And let's dive right in. And heading into the 2025 NFL draft, what are the biggest needs you see for the Bills that they need to fill here?
So probably cornerback would be the one that would jump out the most, even though they did re-sign Dane Jackson, who I think they know really well. It raises the floor of the cornerback room, but someone opposite Christian Benford that they can rely upon in those big games. That would be number one. And then I think interior defensive line. And next to Ed Oliver, they still have Daquan Jones under contract, but he's now well into his 30s, that they need a younger premier talent next to Ed Oliver. We know that Sean McDermott likes to rotate along the defensive line as much as any head coach in the NFL. And that is really the foundation, not just of the Philadelphia Eagles, but of a lot of teams to be really good in the trenches. And the Bills are certainly one of them. So cornerback, D tackle, you can even throw in edge rusher. Then you're getting down to some, tertiary needs like maybe depth at safety, depth at wide receiver, maybe an insurance policy for James Cook, but mostly on the defensive side, which shouldn't be surprising because the Bills' offense was pretty damn good last year.
Yes, they were. And so that would scream that maybe wide receiver early isn't a need because we saw what Josh did using a wide receiver by committee last year. But especially when you look at that defensive line and Ogunjobi and Hoyt's out as well, but you have Ogunjobi out the first 6 games of the year. So when you look at it, you have Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Dwayne Carter, and then besides that, you just need some bodies there. And I'm with you. Daquan Jones has played great for the Bills, but he's just aging at that spot, becoming a touch less effective. So I think the Bills could make a move at defensive tackle. But so if you're in Brandon Beane's shoes, Thursday night of the draft, are you drafting at pick 30 or potentially if they move around, are you drafting best player available, the guy that you could think could come in and contribute no matter what? Or are you looking at this like, okay, we need a corner, we need a defensive tackle, we have to target those areas, in which case you may trade up or trade back to just go specifically target one of those guys?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. And I would lean to best player available, although that may seem to kind of go against what a lot of people are thinking, especially because the Bills are a team with a Super Bowl window wide open, with Josh Allen still in his 20s, coming off of the MVP season. And it's typically thought that the team's rebuilding at, in the top of the draft, they should just go best player available because they have a ton of needs. I feel like there are enough needs and enough positions that could use a few upgrades on the defensive side, and that you have a lot of depth at the defensive tackle position in this draft, that if Nick Manwari, the safety from South Carolina, is available, the Bills should pick him. If James Pierce, the edge rusher from Tennessee, is there, maybe not the biggest need position-wise, but just a premier talent. And if there's one thing that we all can agree upon with Brandon Beane and this scouting department, this front office in Buffalo, maybe some of the first-round picks have not hit as impactfully as people expected, but day 2 and day 3 of the draft with Terrell Bernard and Khalil Shakir and Christian Benford, James Cook, all in the same draft class, a few others that were picked later, they do a great job after round 1. They let the draft come to them. So I don't think it necessarily has to be a corner or has to be a defensive tackle in the first round. Picking the best player available, probably on the defensive side, I think would actually make the most sense.
Yeah, I'm with you there because you don't want to make a short-sighted decision. I think back to a Marcel Darius where you locked yourself in on a defensive tackle. You went with him at number 3, and then we all know how that draft shook out and all the talent that came right behind him in that draft. And so I'm with you there. And you mentioned it earlier. Yes, the Eagles prioritize the trenches, but most teams in the NFL prioritize the trenches. You can't just watch the Super Bowl game and say, okay, the Bills have got to go draft all defensive linemen, because that's where, we're going to get over the hump and we're going to beat Kansas City in the playoffs if we can go draft all these guys. The Bills have addressed it this offseason through free agency. If at pick 30 or whenever they have their first pick, if the best player available is an edge rusher or defensive tackle, sure, go get them. But if it's corner, if it's potentially a safety, I'm not fully against that. I think you add as many quality, great pieces that you can.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that, like, in us agreeing on that, it would kind of go counter to what Brandon Beane has done. That when they picked Kyer Elam, they were like, everyone knew it was almost a telegraphed pick that they were going to pick a corner. Dalton Kincaid, there was wide receiver talk, and a bunch of those receivers in 23 went right in front of the Bills. They traded up, got a weapon for Josh Allen in Dalton Kincaid. So I wonder, not to say that just because Kyer Elam didn't work out and Dalton Kincaid had a little bit of a rocky second season, that Brandon Beane should completely switch up his philosophy. But I wonder if he does make a little bit of an adjustment, or the draft board just falls where a bunch of corners are gone, a lot of the top tier defensive tackles are gone, and the Bills do ultimately go with a different position, but get a better player overall. Because, like, we all can probably agree again that the defense doesn't need massive upgrades, but there are certainly more jobs available on that side of the ball than there are on offense.
Yes, 100%. And I'll be honest with you, the further I've gotten removed from college, the less I've paid attention maybe to just being locked in every Saturday, sun up to sundown, watching college football, become less and less familiar with some of these prospects. Now, this time of year, it starts gearing up. And then certainly, guys that are drafted to the Bills within the division, high up in the draft, I'm going to be locked in on those guys because I don't have to talk about them this offseason and throughout the season. But give me some names. Give me and the listeners some names at pick 30. If the Bills stay put at pick 30, who could be the top guys that are still available, that you kind of earmark as still available across, defensive tackle, defensive end, and corner that you're really honing in on?
So I'll start with the two positions that we've talked about as the biggest needs: cornerback and defensive tackle. Trey Amos from Ole Miss I'm not going to say he's Tre'Davious White 2.0, but he has a similar profile where nothing about his game is tremendous. He's not a 4.4 flat 40 guy with a 40-inch vertical, but coming from the SEC, a lot of ball production, can play zone and man. You saw him make plays in both of those different coverages, and we know the Bills like to mix their coverages as much as maybe any team in the NFL. They ran a lot more man down the stretch. So he feels like a name that would be the right value. That's right where I have him graded. I think I have him as my 31 or my 31st overall player. And then defensive tackle, the hot name is obviously Kenneth Grant from Michigan, in that he's 6'3", 330 plus pounds. He kind of would fit the prototype for what the Bills have liked next to Ed Oliver, with Jordan Phillips and with Star Lotulelei, Quentin Jefferson. They like that big body to two gap at times to keep the linebackers clean and allow Ed Oliver those one-on-one situations at 3 technique. Kenneth Grant doesn't give you premier pass rush ability, but I think in time, because he's only 21 years old, he can develop in that regard, because he's really light on his feet. He doesn't move like he's a 330 plus pounder, and he's very good right now against the run. So he's someone that I think if he were available at 30, the Bills would jump at that pick. A few other names: Derek Harmon from Oregon, the defensive tackle. My comparison for him is actually Daquan Jones. He's a little taller, 310 pounds, can get up the field at times, but is really good controlling blockers, peeking both gaps to make plays on the football near the line of scrimmage. And then really why I've kind of leaned toward defensive tackle for the Bills in round 1, the position at safety, or at corner, I should say, it's not a position that I think there's going to be a ton of premier prospects available for them at 30. There's really Trey Amos and a lot of guys that have question marks because of injury. Savon Revel from East Carolina would be the most explosive, longest corner that they've had in the Sean McDermott era, but he's coming off a torn ACL from East Carolina. Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame would be the best pure man coverage cornerback that Sean McDermott's had, I think, in terms of just what he would be bringing into the league as a prospect and in that first season. he's coming off a hip injury in October. And then even Will Johnson from Michigan, who was a big recruit and played a lot of really good football early in his career at Michigan, didn't tackle very well in 2024 and also got injured 6 games into his final season in Ann Arbor. So that position is a little more murky. I think the defensive tackle spot with Harmon, Kenneth Grant, there's CJ West from Indiana, Darius Alexander from Toledo. There's a lot more names that feel like will be within striking distance of the Bills in the first round at pick 30.
I saw you projected Kenneth Grant to the Bills at 30, and I've seen a lot of buzz about him. Is it simply that he's not a premier pass rusher yet that has allowed him to, in most mock drafts, fall all the way to 30 to the Bills?
Yeah, and we've talked, I mean, I'm sure all your listeners have, and you've probably heard it too, about how good this defensive tackle class is. And I'm a
Right.
firm believer in that. The reason that Grant first stuck out was that he's a little different than a lot of the other pass rushers in this class, that he is that nose tackle body frame. But you're right. The reason why I think he could be available, maybe not all the way at 30, but into the 20s or late 20s for Brandon Beane to make a small trade up to get him, is like you're saying, that the pressure rate was not over 10%. And that's usually what you want to see for a first round defensive tackle. I think it was like right around 8 or 9%. And he's not someone that has the juice to get up the field. He's light on his feet, but there's not insane explosiveness that you really need in today's NFL with how athletic the centers and the guards have gotten to be that 40, 50, 60, 70 pressure a season defensive tackle, which has really become the norm for the first round players at that position.
Has there been a correlation between the Bills' pre-draft visitors and who they've ended up selecting in the draft?
Yeah, usually it's someone that they did meet with. It hasn't always been the case. I know they met with Keon Coleman last year. They met with Dalton Kincaid. I don't have off the top of my head if it's been like 100%, but in general, they do like to meet with those players pre-draft. And I think it's important because, and you certainly know this, covering the team every week, that the culture, for as much as the Bills are not just trying to draft and acquire choir boys, they certainly understand that culture and the camaraderie and playing for each other has mattered a lot. And I think it's been one of the more, I mean, maybe it's talked about a lot, but I still think it's an underrated element of what Sean McDermott has built coming off the Rex Ryan era to help the Bills be a Super Bowl contender seemingly every season.
Yeah. That's I'm behind you 100% there. The culture that they have is special. It also helps attract free agents. People
100%.
talk around the league, and then people want to come be a part of it and sign a 1-year deal with Buffalo on a prove it deal because, one, they got a shot at a Super Bowl, and two, it's a great place to be because of the culture that they have in place. Quick side note story on that, and this is kind of every regime has their different plans with this. I took a visit with the Bills at the combine, but I didn't do a pre-draft visit. They didn't send anyone out to Louisville to meet with me, to work me out. And after the fact, when they selected me at 28, it was a surprise. It wasn't necessarily on my radar. They had already taken Jeff Hangardner, a free agent center, and brought him in from Carolina and paid him pretty well. Now, the Bills ended up telling me they drafted me as a guard. So I guess technically I was the number one guard in the draft that year. But it was interesting. They were telling me afterwards that they didn't want teams to know that they were bringing me in for a visit or sending somebody out because all that's going to get reported, and they didn't want someone trading up in front of them or however they would be. 28th overall, not the hottest commodity in the draft, but it was pretty interesting hearing those stories from Russ Brand and that whole crew at the time.
Yeah, I think in general, that's a great story, by the way, to kind of get a peek behind the curtains at how teams can operate. I mean, obviously different regime now than it was then in 2009, but what I think is good to take from that story is that it doesn't, just because the Bills don't meet with your favorite player doesn't mean they're not going to pick him in the first round for that exact reason, that they may be hoping that player gets to them at 30 and they don't want anything to leak out that they would be hot on the tails of a specific prospect if he falls to them at 30. So I think in general, they've usually met with their first round pick and some of those second, third, fourth rounders that have been so valuable, but I don't think it's a slam dunk guarantee that they have to meet with that player in order to pick him in a couple weeks.
For sure. And you can do your due diligence on these picks in so many different ways. The head coach at the University of Louisville at that time was Steve Cragthorpe. He spent time as the quarterback coach with the Bills under that staff and around that regime, so they could do all their homework through Cragthorpe without ever having to bring me in, which, one, that saves you an extra pre-draft visitor where you don't have to, waste one per se on me, but also they could do their homework, but then not reveal their card. So it was interesting to hear all that after the fact, because when they took me, I'm like, well, it just seemed like they weren't that interested, but they weren't showing their cards. We're going to give a quick shout out to Waterboy, best hydration packets on the market right now. We'll make sure to get you some sent to your house. The listeners, use the link in the show notes. You get 20% off at Waterboy as the Kentucky Derby's approaching and a number of other events, the draft. Maybe have a couple cocktails. I will definitely be using these to make sure that I'm staying on my game. All right, so let's switch gears just a touch. Is Cam Ward your unanimous number one pick to the Titans, where there's really no questions about that?
He is, but I would say in most drafts, he would not be the number one overall pick. I think it's a huge need for the Tennessee Titans that is still, I think their roster is as barren as any roster in the NFL, and their head coach, Brian Callahan, coming off really a disastrous season with Will Levis in year 2. I think he needs to win and win immediately. He's certainly on the hot seat. They have a new general manager, and obviously those general managers usually like to pick a quarterback and get that process started right away. He's a good player. He reminds me a lot of David Garrard in that he's not quite as big as David Garrard, but he gets the most out of his God-given ability. He's not someone that is Michael Vick or is Josh Allen running around with the football, but he can create. There's some off structure like elements to his game. He doesn't have a huge arm, but he can dial the RPMs up a little bit when he needs to. Accuracy is good, not great. And apparently, I mean, we are talking about character and off the field stuff. The intangibles, the work ethic are through the roof. And maybe that is what's beyond on the field. That could be what's really separating him from Shedeur Sanders and some of the other prospects at the quarterback spot in this draft.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about, Callahan must win now. You got a new GM. And that's one of those things in the NFL where it's like you hope you only get the number one pick once every 20 years. Now you get your franchise guy, and it just so happens that this isn't the most top heavy, like strong. Okay, here's your number one guy. We know he's the stud, 2 or 3 a lot of times lately. And so we'll see how that shakes out down in Tennessee if that's the pick. I saw in your most recent mock draft, you had Shedeur Sanders falling all the way to number 7 to the Jets. Is the hype on him cooling down where you think he could really fall that far?
Yeah, I think he could even fall further than that. And I think that those picks, 6, 7, 8, and 9, 6, Las Vegas Raiders are not going to pick a quarterback, but we'll see if they go Ashton Genty. 7, with the Jets, no one really knows. From being at the combine, trying to talk to as many people within the league as I could, and other media members were like, we don't know. No one really knew. New head coach in Aaron Glenn, new GM. They signed Justin Fields, but at this point, I think people understand who the quarterback Justin Fields is. He's probably not a long-term answer. Do they go quarterback? Do they plug in Shedeur Sanders into that New York City market? We don't know. 8, Carolina Panthers have a lot of needs, probably go defense. And then 9, New Orleans Saints, a team that is another roster that's pretty barren. We just heard the news earlier this week that they are uncertain about the 2025 for Derek Carr. So if he can't even play because of a shoulder injury, he's getting up there in age as well. That could be another landing spot for Shedeur Sanders. We did see, and I think I saw it this morning, that the New York Giants, talking about pre-draft visits, are meeting with Shedeur Sanders one last time to do a pre-draft workout, which to me is a little silly this late in the process. That to me shows that there's some disagreement within the room there in the Giants brass. So maybe that could be where he ultimately goes. But from everyone that I've talked to and just my own evaluation of him, it feels like he's cooling a little bit, and that don't be surprised if Shedeur Sanders is picked a little bit later than, 2 to the Browns or 3 to the Giants, like we saw and heard early in the pre-draft process.
And he was so hyped coming into the offseason. Obviously he's primetime son. And so that'll be one of those things on draft night where the cameras are going to be on him and everyone's going to be focused on it, but it's not going to be a surprise maybe to many of the experts or GMs and teams around the league, but it'll be one of those things where I'm sure ESPN will have a heyday with that one. All right. So back to the Bills a little bit. Okay, so Beane has taken some heat for misses over the years, whether it's Elam, whether it's been, Kincaid having a rough second season, whether it's Keon trading out of the pick for Worthy, and then you have Keon who gets hurt and doesn't have that type of production that maybe we'd expect after the Bills traded out of the first round. Is this kind of a case of where Bills fans are simply focusing on the Bills so much that they're not looking around the league and seeing misses from other GMs? And really to piggyback that, but same topic, how would you rate Brandon Beane as far as how he's done in the draft over the years?
So it's funny that you say that, Eric, because I have to like talk my dad off the ledge sometimes with that. I mean, he's watched the NFL, watched the Bills his whole life, like since they came into the league. But there are times where he's hyper focused on the Bills and doesn't understand that there are like not too many GMs that have a better track record of team building, both in free agency and the draft, as Brandon Beane. And I think the results speak for themselves with the 5 straight AFC East titles, what they've done in the playoffs to get to 2 AFC title games, and just they're a perennial Super Bowl contender. And he did draft Josh Allen. So I think that is a really good point, that you want every single pick to hit, and that's just never going to happen. If you're over the course of 10, 15 years, even less as a GM, if you're hitting on 30 to 40 to 50% of your picks, you're the best GM in the NFL draft wise. I think what I can't put my finger on, I'll say, is Brandon Beane does not have the best track record in the first round. Greg Rousseau, good player. Obviously, Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds. But Greg Rousseau, Ed Oliver, good players, not maybe total game changers that have like revolutionized the position or are defensive player of the year type candidates, but they've obviously been extended. They're core pieces. Guys like Cody Ford, early second rounder. You mentioned some of the other misses. But afterward, like I said earlier, in the 2022 draft with James Cook, Terrell Bernard, Christian Benford, I mean, it's hard to have more hits in one draft than that one. I think overall, it's a testament to not just Brandon Beane, but the entire scouting staff, the analytics department, that should make fans understand that for as much hype as Thursday gets, round one, and who your team's going to pick, and we all stay up and watch, the Bills are probably going to pick close to midnight on Thursday, April 24th. The second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth round, that's really where the teams go from being good to great and being Super Bowl contenders. Now, I will agree with people that say, hey, but you're going to get your potential Hall of Fame worthy type players more frequently in round one than later. And that's true. But we've just seen it with the Bills. You can look at the Chiefs. You can look at the Eagles. The first rounders are great, but I think Brandon Beane's track record, for as not great as it is there, it's outweighed by what he's done finding those gems on day 2 and day 3 of the draft.
I agree. And besides Josh Allen, which they had to trade up to get to that spot, Ed Oliver the following year, they haven't been picking in the top 10. When you have a great team year after year, it's harder to hit on those first round draft picks. And so, yeah, I'm with you. I'm obviously a huge fan of Brandon Beane and what he's done for this Bills franchise. I was the first contract that he ever gave out. So very appreciative of Brandon Beane and what he's done for the organization. And you just can't gloss over all of the hits that they've had throughout. And it's not always easy when you're backed up to picking at 27, 28, 30, wherever it may be. Let's take a moment to hear from one of our sponsors, and that's Dan-O's Seasoning. You got to go check out their new chili lime seasoning. It goes great on chicken, a number of other things. It's also great in a margarita, if that's your thing. Go to a retailer store near you or go to danosseasoning.com and get you some of that chili lime. Yum, yum, get you some. All right, let's take a quick look back at the 2024 Bills draft picks, and we won't go through them all. I just want to get, quick thoughts, maybe a grade from you on, a few of these top guys that were drafted. What was your assessment of Keon Coleman?
So I didn't love him pre-draft, and that's, I mean, being a draft analyst, that's one thing that I love about my job, is that I can't go back and say, oh, well, I did really like him. Or if it's a team that, is a Bills rival, I can't say, oh, well, I didn't really like that player either. It's
right.
My grades are my grades. They're done. Actually, like this past week, I'm totally finished with my grades. I didn't love the ability or the inability to create separation, and I thought he was good, not great in contested catch situations. There were those times where he would make the highlight reel grab in traffic, but I didn't see that routinely, like him coming down with the football at Florida State, and that's what we saw in his rookie season. I think if Coleman, who is still very young, and Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have spoke to that this offseason, that there is development and there is upside. You saw that at Florida State. He returned kicks. He was good after the catch. So he can be, in his age 22 season, a much better player next year. I do think Coleman needs to move into the slot where there's a little bit more space for him to navigate some of those routes, and Joe Brady can scheme him open. We saw down the stretch before his injury in November, he started to play quality football where it seemed like he understood route concepts and where he needed to be. So I don't think he had a great rookie season. I think there were flashes, which you do like to see, and you almost have to see them in year one to feel encouraged going into year two. But there is certainly a lot of room for improvement for Keon Coleman within this kind of wide receiver by committee approach that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, I agree. What were your thoughts on Cole Bishop?
So I loved Cole Bishop as a prospect. I was a little concerned about his tackling ability. He was not super reliable at Utah. That's why I had a little bit of a lower grade on him. I had him like in the 3rd round. Bills picked him in the 2nd round, but I could understand why they picked him because he wore so many hats at Utah. He was in the slot. He played free safety. He played outside corner at times. He was their linebacker, like in the box, dealing with pulling guards and centers at the next level. So he kind of feels like that super smart and savvy safety that Sean McDermott really has liked and gravitated toward in this era. And I like that he tested really well. He's not someone that's just an overachiever who's not a great athlete. And I think the injury in training camp really set him back because even though he did have a lot of responsibilities in college, learning a completely new scheme is always going to be hard, especially for a safety that has a lot of duties. So that put him kind of behind the 8 ball. We saw him make some plays later in the season when he came back and was healthy. Just needs to clean up some of the tackling, and that's usually the case for a lot of young defensive backs in the NFL, especially with a coach like Sean McDermott that consistently hammers home the importance of being a quality tackler. It's not just all about coverage at defensive back in the NFL.
Right. One of his position coaches in college right after the draft texted me and he was like, dude, you're absolutely going to love this kid. He is a stud. Don't, you said it in your terms. I'll say it in mine. You said he's not just a try hard guy. His coach said he's not just a white, unathletic, savvy safety. He's like, this dude's an elite athlete. He's going to fit in. He's going to be a stud. Hated that he got hurt during training camp. Otherwise, I think he could have competed for that starting role over DeMar Hamlin. But instead, I look for him to make a big jump next year. All right, last one. Dwayne Carter.
So Dwayne Carter early in the season was a healthy scratch, and it was a little disappointing. The Bills moved into the 3rd round to get him. He was like captain at Duke, 3 years of I don't want to say elite level production, but quality production, and is a little bit of that undersized upfield pass rusher like Ed Oliver. We saw, similar to what happened with Keon Coleman, October into November, he started to play a little bit more, get some more action on Sundays, and made some plays close to the line of scrimmage and behind the line. Then he got injured, and then when he came back for late season, in the regular season and in the playoffs, the impact really wasn't there. So he's another one that is a little bit older, but has a higher floor, and it'll be interesting to see how much in the rotation he is to start mini camp, training camp, preseason, and early in the regular season, because the talent is there. The well-roundedness to his game is there, but the Bills certainly need to see him take a step forward to round out some of the depth at their defensive tackle position.
Absolutely. They're going to need him early on. So they need him to have a great offseason, a great training camp preseason, because those first 6 games of the year, just based upon the numbers and Ogunjobi being out with the suspension, they have to have him step up. So they're going to need a big year 2 from Dwayne Carter. And we've often seen guys make a big jump in year 2. The Bills do a great job developing players, especially on the back end of the defense. It's so complex that it often takes a little time for those guys to fully comprehend the scheme. So we need a big offseason for my boy, Dwayne Carter. I got a few rapid fire questions for you and we'll get you out of here. All right. Number 1. Do you think it's harder to grade players for the draft in this NIL transfer era, or does it help that you get to often see them in different schemes and not just one specific scheme?
It's certainly a new era for college football. And like you're mentioning, for draft evaluators like myself, I think it's a little bit of both. I think I don't love to see that a player was at 3 different schools in like 4 years. That leads to some questions about what was going on there. Although I'm not really grading on anything with character because I can't talk to these guys. So in
Right.
general, I like the fact that we see so many of these started at Princeton, ended at Iowa State, like these guys that can like an Osiris Torrance, even really before we've gotten into the prime of the NIL deal era, go from Louisiana Lafayette and then be in the bright lights of the SEC and play really well at Florida. I think that was the final check mark for me and maybe for the Bills to pick him in the second round just a few years ago, that it wasn't too big for him to go up in level of competition. And that's, I think, a big reason why he has very quickly transitioned to the NFL, because he already made such a big jump early in his college career.
Besides Josh Allen, who's Brandon Beane's best draft pick?
I think it's got to be Christian Benford. I mean, maybe
I
as a
agree.
draft guy, I'm always thinking about value, and to pick him in the 6th round. And I watched him really late in the process, and I liked him because he was all around the football. I thought he had to play safety in the NFL because he wasn't a big time athlete. But like what you just mentioned, the Bills do such a tremendous job. Bobby Babich is certainly a part of this as well, outside of Sean McDermott, but developing back 7 players, learning the scheme, understanding their keys and how to read them and route concepts. The ball skills are through the roof. He's a tremendous tackler, and he's actually held up as an athlete too. So to get a small school Villanova guy that was uber productive but fell to the 6th round because he didn't test through the roof, they pay him the big money that he certainly deserves. I think in terms of pure value, that is right up there with Josh Allen.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on Christian Benford. Absolute stud to get him that late in the draft. Him step in as a rookie and play the way he did. Just absolute stud. Huge fan of his. Will Buffalo get to host the NFL draft at some point?
I think so. I would say 27 or 28 once the new stadium has been up for a few years. And hopefully at that point, and I'm hearing that they'll try to be doing this, there'll be more hotels, restaurants right around, Southwestern, Abbott, in Orchard Park. That would be a really fun scene. I think obviously Bills Mafia with how they tailgate for the draft, I think you would see hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people in Orchard Park. So I do think they'll get it. It's in Green Bay. It's been in Detroit. They don't care about if it's a little bit chilly, and certainly Bills fans wouldn't care. So I think they would show out. And the NFL wants to showcase new stadiums, new locales like that. So I think at that point, once everything is not just in a test run or in the inaugural season, I think a few seasons after the new Highmark Stadium opens, there will be a draft in Buffalo.
I'm with you. And in my opinion, you have the Super Bowl rotation, and Buffalo's likely not going to be on that just because of our limitations of being able, the capacity we can bring in. You have the combine sitting in Indy and it's not moving. So they should rotate the draft around to cities that aren't going to host the Super Bowl. I think that's only fair. It brings that extra revenue in to the city, get to showcase it, let the fans have some fun with it. And Buffalo will be the greatest host town for the draft. It just simply is what it is. And that's a fact. All right. Last one for me. Last time you were on the show, we talked about the wings. This time we're going to talk about beef on weck. So what's your favorite beef on weck in Western New York?
Schwabel's, no hesitation. Schwabel's, and it's in West Seneca. You step in there and it feels like you're stepping back into like the 1940s, and it's clean, pristine. The vibe is great. They are literally just like at Barbell in East Aurora. They are cutting the roast beef on the bar right in front of you, and literally will take it from the butcher's knife, put it right onto the Kimmelwick roll. I think it's always perfectly cooked. It's not dry. It's juicy, flavorful. To me, I think it's kind of like Barbell and 911 in terms of it stands alone in terms of how many different beef on weck sandwiches you can get in the Buffalo area. I think Schwabel's is the best.
And you were not prepped for that question. That rolled off immediately. That's going to have to be a spot that I check out immediately. Chris, thank you for your time. Enjoy this final time leading up to the draft. I always appreciate you having on. Always appreciate catching up, brother.
Thanks, Eric. Appreciate it.